Welcome inside episode 647 of the Locked On Senators podcast. I'm Ross Levitan on the outskirts of enemy territory in Winnipeg, Manitoba, alongside Brandon Piller up in the Blue Mountains, and we are one sleep away from Sens hockey.
And what better way to prepare, Ross, than having the voice of the Ottawa Senators for over 30 years? Dean Brown joins us on the show for a good chat leading into the season.
He joins us from Tremblant, where the Ottawa Senators are on the ice at practice, and the guy who's skating as an extra is exactly who the fans would hope. So we're going to get into all that. Plus, the Belleville Sens have unveiled their fifth captain in franchise history. This is the Locked On Senators podcast. It's your team every day.
Locked On Senators, your daily podcast on the Ottawa Senators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Senators your first listen on this Wednesday, October 12th. We are free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube, where the best way you can help the show grow is to like every video by clicking the thumbs up and subscribing to the Locked On Senators channel. It also goes a very long way if on Apple Podcasts you write a review. We've been getting an abundance of them recently. We appreciate that. Keep them coming because hockey is back, and I know that, Pilsy, because there were two games last night, and a former Ottawa Senator, #Sens Abroad, scored the game-winning goal in each of them.
Yeah, Mika Zibanejad and Mark Stone showing why we love them so much in their time in Ottawa, but it's still fun to watch them from abroad because they're still lighting it up.
No doubt, but it's time to turn the page. The Ottawa Senators are having one final practice before heading to Buffalo, where they'll take on the Sabres and Craig Anderson tomorrow night in their season opener. They made us wait for it. There's games tonight. There were games yesterday. The ones
games
overseas.
In Europe, yeah.
But the practice lines today, do you think they are what we will see player by player tomorrow night?
Yeah, I really do. I mean, why would you practice anything different other than what you're going to set out for that lineup? And it's going to be interesting because pretty much it's what we expected other than a few top centers, flipped spots, and the fourth line center is someone that maybe didn't have the inside track at the start of camp, but grabbed that job and earned it in Mark Kastelic. So it's very, very interesting how these lines are looking. And if you're watching on YouTube, Ross just pulled them up. And as I was alluding to, the top line is Brady Tkachuk with Tim Stützle and Drake Batherson. Then you got DeBrincat with Josh Norris and Claude Giroux, Tyler Mott, Shane Pinto, Joseph. Love that third line. So good. Mm-hmm. And I also love this fourth line. Parker Kelly with Mark Kastelic and Austin Watson. That is going to be a tough, strong line to play against. And on defense, it's looking nice too. We got Shabbat with Zub. Zub is back. Thankfully, we were worried he had an injury that was going to keep him out a couple of games, but that's not the case. Sanderson with Travis Hamonic and Eric Brandstrom with Holden. That means number 22 is on the outside looking in. And then we got the two icebergs in net, Ross. Forsberg and Hellberg, the two massive tendies. Forsberg will be getting the start, no doubt, as he put on an absolute clinic in last year's opener.
Yeah, I'm so excited for this decor. Like, you looked at it, it was always the Achilles heel all summer long, but don't discount addition by subtraction. Like, look, the left side of this decor, and say what you want about what Eric Brandstrom's shown at the NHL level, there's a ton of offensive potential on that left side. So all you need from the righties, Zub, Hamonic, and Holden, is play a responsible shutdown game, pucks off the glass, pucks on your partner's stick. And I think that they can tape this together for a few months here while they wait for either a healthy Chychrun and a price to come down for that trade or something else to show its head on the trade market. I don't mind them going into the season like this.
Yeah, I don't love it, but I think it can be fine. It all comes down to, and with Cam Talbot being injured, the pressure is on Anton Forsberg. It all comes down to, is he going to be able to mop up some of the mistakes that this decor is inevitably going to leave up? Because I have the utmost faith that this forward core is going to score goals. I have no issue with that. It's how can the defense hold up, and can Forsberg kind of help prop them up until Talbot's here, or, like you said, Chychrun or someone else is brought in as reinforcements.
Well, tomorrow we're going to get into some burning questions around this Ottawa Senators team and our final predictions. It will be a game day for the Ottawa Senators. Cannot wait to see the guys back on the ice tomorrow night in Buffalo. But today we want to bring on the voice of the Ottawa Senators, Dean Brown. And on the other side, we're going to tell you who the captain is for the Belleville Sens. Belleville, by the way, starting their regular season on Friday. So Friday is going to be an absolutely jam-packed show where we're going to break down what we saw Thursday night from Ottawa and then turn our attention to what Belleville's lineup could look like going into a busy opening weekend where they take on their dreaded rivals, the Laval Rocket. First in Laval on Friday and then in Belleville on Saturday. Before we get to Dean Brown, though, Pills, you got a word from one of our favorite sponsors in SimpliSafe.
Absolutely, Ross. The numbers don't lie. In the last decade, over 4 million people have chosen SimpliSafe home security to protect their home. And you don't get those kind of numbers without doing something right. At SimpliSafe, your safety is the only thing that matters. They protect you with cutting-edge security technology powered by 24/7. That's all around the clock. Professional monitoring agents who always have your back. SimpliSafe blankets your home in protection with advanced sensors for every single room, window, and door, so you're covered. HD security cameras for inside and outside, smarter ways to detect motion that only alert you when a threat is real. The monitoring experts use proprietary advanced response technology, that sounds fancy, to visually confirm when a break-in is real, so you get the highest priority police dispatch when you need it. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplisafe.com/lockedonnhl. Save 20% on your SimpliSafe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month free. Visit simplisafe.com/lockedonnhl to learn more. Guys, there's no safe like SimpliSafe.
All right, now let's get to our interview with the voice of the Ottawa Senators on TSN 1200. It's Dean Brown. All right, we now welcome a very special guest back to Locked On Senators. It feels long overdue since the last time we had the voice of your Ottawa Senators, Dean Brown, join the show. Dean, how are you doing today?
Doing very well up here at lovely Tremblant. Beautiful setting outside, and hockey's about to begin, so that's all good for me.
Does it feel like a new leaf is turning over? 8 games in the preseason. Did that feel long to you as well?
Well, as I've told you guys before, Gordon and I both get paid by the game, so I think we should have 17 or 20 preseason games. I'd be fine with that. So, no, it doesn't. But I understand that people start and especially players start getting anxious for real games. But for Gordon and I, sure you'd like to get to the regular season, but we don't call preseason games any differently or less passionately than we do regular season games. So for us, for our purposes, a preseason game is also a game we get excited to do. So, but I do understand how, especially players, when you're playing 8 preseason games, 5 or 6 is kind of the number they prefer. So when you get into 6, 7, 8, they're kind of anxious to to get going, and I get that. But for us, I keep saying that the players are in such a great shape, and since I get paid by the game, I think they should play about 20 preseason games and maybe 100 regular season games. That would be good for my bank account. So I'm all for that.
There you go. Hopefully you guys get paid for the air miles as well as you travel to 4 different provinces and 4 different games. Dean, how was it doing the Kraft Hockeyville games in New Brunswick and in Newfoundland? That must have been cool, eh?
Yeah, it's fantastic. We've been very lucky to do many Kraft Hockeyville games, and they're always great. They really are. And I've had people say, well, as far for you guys, production wise, the facilities aren't the same as an NHL rink, and your broadcast locations can be pretty hinky, and that's all true. But I guess it's all about what your expectation is. It's not like an NHL facility. It can never be, but people go to great lengths. The league goes to great lengths to make it as good as it possibly can be for us to broadcast from. But to be honest with you, for Gordon and I, we don't really care, because when you're there, you really do get the feeling about what it's really about. And it's about the people. And they are just so happy to see you, so happy to see NHL hockey, so happy to see the players. For a lot of them, it's the only time they'll ever be that close to an NHL player or an NHL game. The environment is great, and in Newfoundland, I can tell you, I know a lot of people say it, but it really is true. They are the friendliest people on the planet. Anytime I get a chance to go to Newfoundland, my arm is up, and let's go. So anywhere through the Maritimes is fantastic, but If it includes a stop in Newfoundland, I'm all for that. So it's great because it's such a great environment, because it's so positive. The people are so happy to see you there, and they do everything they can to make your life and your job easy. And we just have a blast. We love it. I know I'm speaking for Gord too, but we've talked about this many times. It's one of our favorite things to do when you get to do a craft hockeyville game. It really is.
Hey, funny enough, I don't know how or why I remember this, but the year that they were in St. John's, I remember you took a photo in the elevator where the chef has a big fish over his shoulder. I think I was there the week before and I noticed that as well, but that's in more of a city. Whereas in Gander, you're in like a community center instead of Mile One arena. So do you have a preference when you're calling games, whether it's really close? I think it's UBS, the new arena in Long Island, where you're kind of in the middle, or way up in the bird's eye. Do you have a preference when you're calling games?
Well, the preference, in all these rinks, they're small rinks. So you're never going to be as high and far away as you are in an NHL rink, which is good. But in some rinks, there's nowhere to put you. Like when we did the game in Lucan, Ontario, just outside of London, 2 years ago, whenever that was, we're right on the boards at the blue line. That's too close. You're actually too close to be able to call the game. Well, you can't see players because it's like they're right in front of you. You need to have some elevation, and you need to preferably be looking down at it, so it's far easier to recognize players and plays. So in both the places we had out east, they were great locations. First one, their mezzanine level is 8 rows from the ice because the rink only holds 1,100 people. So it was perfect for us. And in New Brunswick, it was kind of the same. I think it was 11 rows up. And again, they had us on the mezzanine level looking down. So it's fantastic. So not all the places are great. I think one of the first one we did, they had us on scaffolding in one end of the building, about halfway up the glass. So, it was a great experience, but for calling the game, that's brutal. That's, you can't see when the players are coming at you, from the opposing team, you don't know who they are. I'm not around those players through training camp. I don't know who they are facially. You can't see their names or numbers. So, that became a real challenge. But the 2 games we just did, the broadcast locations for us were great. But for us, generally, you have to get a little bit of elevation. You have to be looking down a bit to be able to really recognize who's who and do a decent job calling the game. So, like I said, the thing in Lucan was great. We had a great time, but probably not, as far as accuracy goes, probably not our best broadcast ever. There was a lot of pausing as we were trying to figure out who was that who just shot that puck, because he threw 4 guys on that side of the ice, and now I can't see him because the stick guy's in front of him. So, but again, I'm not sure anybody really cares, because it really is more about the experience of it.
Yeah, no doubt. And hey, I got to pull this up too, just because it was the weirdest thing that I even remembered. And I might be like the Google search engine of Twitter, but this is from Dean Brown there. If you're watching on YouTube there, only in Newfoundland would you have a fish over the chef's shoulder like that? Hey,
I know. And that was, everybody saw that because that was in the elevator, as you mentioned. It was in the elevator. So as soon as you get on the elevator, you go, well, that's kind of odd, but I guess, here, that's kind of what they do. A chef and his fish, it's awe-inspiring,
Well, let's slice into training camp itself. Was there a standout for you, one player that maybe caught your eye more than the others?
You know what? I'm not sure there was any surprises for most people, either the media or the fans, because, as DJ Smith kind of said at the beginning of camp, the team is basically set, and it was. And really the only thing that was to be decided was 2 things: slotting, and could you find a purpose for one of the 2 guys or both of the guys that you brought in on PTOs, Michael Del Cole and Derek Brassard. They ended up finding a role for Derek Brassard that made sense. And, I think the biggest thing was him agreeing to be, at this point in his career, a utility player, a depth player, a guy who's not going to play every night, and he was fine with that. So it made sense. But other than that, really, I think the whole process was just more about slotting. And I think for me, the guy that probably was one of my bigger disappointments in camp, because I really thought we would see something this year, was Sokolov, and it just didn't happen for the young man. He just did not have a great camp, and that's not to say that but he didn't have a great camp. I didn't think, and I was expecting quite a bit there. I thought this might be a breakthrough year for him, and Kastelic. In that, I'm not surprised that he's starting the year with the team. I think he is, with DJ Smith and the way he likes to run his teams, he is a prototypical 4th-line center. Big, can win faceoffs, can play for in the penalty kill, can fight a bit, feisty guy, passionate player. That's prototypical 4th line, but you just didn't know if he had enough experience. So I like the fact that he appears that he's going to be on the starting day roster. We'll wait and see. Maybe Gambrell instead, but he's made the opening day roster. Now it's to being on the ice for opening night. But those were on the good side and the downside. I think Kastelic earned where he is. I think he earned that, and I think sadly for Sokolov, I think he earned being in Belleville too. I think I'm like a lot of people. He's one of those guys that if you meet him and you get to know him a little bit, he is a fantastic young man. And so he's one of those guys you kind of pull for them, you kind of want them to succeed. And that was certainly the case for me. I was wanting and hoping Sokolov to succeed because I think down the road, there's a lot there. Soft hands for a big man, and skating, I think, has gotten a bit better. His weight is down a bit, but it's just not quite there yet. So that might have been the one negative and the one positive. The rest, I think, kind of is what it is. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not sure, you guys follow this team as closely as anybody does. I'm sure there was nothing shocking to you about the final decisions. And I think that's probably the same for most fans, most media members.
Yeah, and that's fair. And Igor Sokolov is definitely a friend of the show. We've had him on a bunch and we're rooting for him. But yeah. I think it's hard to crack this lineup now that this isn't the Ottawa Senators of the last couple seasons, right, Dean? Like when you bring in guys like Giroux, guys like DeBrincat, guys like Tyler Mott, a lot of those open spots tend to get filled up by veterans, so it makes things a little bit more difficult. Now, I would ask you about Derek Brassard. This is something Ross and I have discussed on recent episodes. He's 49 games away from hitting 1,000 career games. Do you think he can get it done this season in a Sens uniform, or you think it's not going to quite be 49 games, especially with, like you mentioned, the emergence of Mark Kastelic and how he's kind of taken a hold of that fourth line center job?
Yeah, well, I think he can, because the other reality you have to deal with in hockey and in any pro sport is injuries. There's going to be injuries, and I don't think I'm not sure that Derek Brassard is a guy that's going to get in the lineup because there's an injury on the fourth line. If you look at his career and the kind of player he's been, the kind of player he is a more skilled offensive guy. So I think right now, if you look at the way they have this team structured, if there was an injury on the fourth line, I think the guy who would fill that would be Gambrell. And if there's some kind of an injury in any of the other three lines above that, that's an opportunity for Brassard because he can play and will play all three positions. But I just don't think that, he has the kind of game that would fit well on the fourth line. So I think it's one of the reasons why they go into the season carrying two extra forwards, because it's really about slotting. It's not about how many points a guy has. It's about what role he plays. And if you lost one of the guys who plays a role on the fourth line, I'm not sure that is your best option to fill it with a guy like Derek Brassard. The same as if you got an injury in the top two lines, I'm not sure the best idea would be to fill it with Gambrell. Because that's really not the role that he generally plays. But I think, because there's always injuries, if you're looking at playing, if you say 49 games, you're talking about, a little more than half of the season. I can see that happening because I can see in the top three lines in this team the possibility that there's going to be injuries through the season because Ottawa's like every other team. You pretty much have injuries through the season. And, those are 9 possibilities for Brassard to get some games in. If you're looking at the top 9 in this team. So I think that's a very doable thing for him to get, 40, 42, 45, 49, 50 games. I think that could happen. But again, I think it will be through injury or illness because I just don't think that they would replace any of the top 9 for performance purposes because by and large, this team has now matured to the point where the guys they have on any given night are better than what Derek Brassard can bring to the table, other than his experience. So I think he's great in the role they've given him, and more importantly, the role that he is accepted. But again, I think with injuries, there's no way that you can say that he's not going to have a fair shot at playing 40, 42, 45, 49 games, something like that.
Yeah, well, he said himself, like the Jason Spezza role in Toronto is kind of what he's aiming to do. And Spezza was 58 games, 54, and then 71, really kind of establishing himself as a good option in the bottom 6. So if Brassard can do that skill-wise, then, hey, keep him in the lineup as far as I'm concerned. But no, I think that was well said there. Now, Dean, goaltending aside, we know that that's the most important part of hockey. I'm sure your partner would tell you the same, Gordo. And hey, Gord Wilson, by the way, got some major stick taps from Pierre Dorion when we had him on the show. We asked Pierre, in case of emergency between Trent Mann, Pierre Dorion, and Gord Wilson, who would be the guy to strap on the pads in an NHL game. And Pierre gave the nod to Gord, so he can walk around a little puffy chested in Tremblant, knowing that he's the emergency goalie for this team. But that's a long-winded way of saying, outside of goaltending, if this team's going to make the playoffs, what's the most important aspect for you?
Well, if this team makes the playoffs, they'd be like any other team in that goaltending has to be solid. There's no teams in today's NHL that get into the playoffs or are successful in the playoffs with average goaltending. It just doesn't happen anymore. You look at the East last year. Every team making the playoffs is a 100-point team. There's no easy teams. There's no easy outs. You can't have average goaltending, and Ottawa will be no different. By that time we'll be talking about, hopefully, from the team's standpoint, you've got Forsberg and you'll have Talbot. After his rib issue is resolved in 5 to 7 weeks or 4 or whatever it ends up being. But that is something that has to be a given. If this team is going down the stretch and getting towards that goal that they publicly stated of being, in contention for something by the trade deadline or still at the trade deadline, then part of that mix will have to have been solid, balanced goaltending. And I think with those two guys healthy, they can get that. I think Forsberg and Cam Talbot can provide that. But suffice it to say, this team or any other team isn't going anywhere unless they get that kind of goaltending, and that is always the most important thing. It's kind of like, there's no point in discussing anything else if you're not getting that. It is irrelevant how good your power play is if you have average goaltending. It's irrelevant what your penalty kill is if you don't have, so it all starts and stops with that. And I think that if both can stay healthy after Talbot gets back from his rib thing, I think this pairing actually has a real chance to be able to do that.
Well, let's stick with the goaltending then, and it's kind of an ironic situation. Anton Forsberg, guy picked up on waivers, ended up being a very, very stable guy in the crease for Ottawa. Now with Talbot's injury, like we've mentioned, Magnus Hellberg has been the most recent pickup on waivers. You got a chance to see him in action out east. What's your first impression of Magnus Hellberg, and how comfortable do you think this team is, or are you, in having him play a couple starts before Talbot's back?
Well, your first impression when you meet Magnus Hellberg is he's tall. He's 6'6". Yes. Sometimes with hockey players, they're 5'9", but they list them as 5'11". They cheat upwards. He's 6'6", and he's all a 6'6". He's a very big man, very outgoing guy. But to be honest with you, the other side of it, the confidence that the teammate have him, I'm sure they'll say that they're very confident, but they don't know. I don't know. No one can know. It's very difficult to predict how he's going to be in the NHL because there's no baseline to look back at. He was very sometimes where you end up has less to do with how good you are and more to do with the situation and opportunity that you have. And in the case of a guy like Hellberg, he has been very unfortunate that in the NHL, he's been in 2 wrong places for his career. He gets drafted by Nashville when Pekka Rinne is in the prime of his career playing 70 games a year. Well, he ain't playing there. So he spent virtually all of his time in Nashville in the minors, and then he gets traded to New York. And there's a guy named Lundqvist who's still in the heart of his career playing 65 games a year. So, and that's when he made the decision to go to the KHL, spent 5 years in the KHL. Now in the KHL, deemed to be the second best pro league in the world, playing against good players. And he was a starting goalie. He wasn't in a rotation, wasn't a backup. He was a starter, played very well. But still, trying to figure out what that means as far as facing NHL shooters on a nightly basis, I don't know. I don't know if anybody can say they know. There's no baseline to know. He never played when he was in North America. He never played enough games in the NHL because of where he was and where he was slotted within those organizations to really know. And then he goes to the KHL, so you don't really know. So I think that, in the 5 to 7 weeks that Cam Talbot's going to be out with his rib injury, there is no way that Forsberg can play all those games. So we are going to find out. But I would not presume for an instant to be able to tell you how I think he's going to do, because I have no baseline to work off of and I have no clue. But, out east when he played, the one game he played, he looks like a professional goalie. That's all I can tell you. It's not like he's out there swimming around. You can tell there's a guy who's not a kid. He's 31. He's got some experience, and he's calm in the net, and he's very big. But again, I can't tell you how that might translate into the NHL, and I'm not sure how any of the players can tell either. We're all going to find out at the same time.
Well, no back-to-backs until December, which is a rarity, especially over the last couple seasons where it's been nonstop back-to-back. I think it was 17 one year.
Yeah, it
Unbelievable.
was.
But
Yeah.
with the schedule the way it is, it's ripe for the picking for Anton Forsberg to grab the baton and run with it. Now, Dean, I want to move on to my favorite up-and-coming player on this team, and Shane Pinto, how he didn't miss a beat after missing almost an entire season. Comes back, leads the team in points in the preseason. Yeah, big asterisk, it's preseason. But how's he look to you? And do you expect him to be the first guy over the boards on the penalty kill for this team as well?
I think he's going to get time on the penalty kill. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I think that, you want to spread things out and you want to be able to use different bodies. And I think they're going to try and do that. So I don't think he's going to be one of the guys that is always out there. But they're going to use him in different spaces. He has been outstanding. He really has. And, you'd be lying if you said you weren't sitting there watching him, wondering how the year off really affected him, because I don't know what he played last year, 5 games before the injury and the surgery and everything else. So and even before that, because of COVID. So if you look at the last 2 years, he's one of those guys that really hasn't played very much at all. So, you're wondering, what's he going to look like? What's the compete level going to be? Are his skills, he has looked outstanding. He really has. And I think, that really makes a lot of people within the organization have a sense of calm about, what they look at in the middle of the rink for this team, because, Ottawa has a very high skill level at the center position in their top 3 centers, but a lot of youth, they're very young players. So you're always wondering, are they ready for this? Are they ready for and now with Norris, he's gone through so many things, even though he's a young player, he's been put in situations where, he's proven he can handle playing against the best players on the other teams. He can handle another role. He can, but you don't know with Pinto because he hasn't been there to play. Preseason is only preseason. We all have to understand that. But man, there are not many things where he didn't check off the boxes during the preseason. And again, you can't know how that's going to translate into regular season games until he gets to them. But like I said, there's not many boxes he didn't check off in the preseason and training camp to show that not only he's ready for that next step, but that he is anxious for it and ready to challenge for it. There was no passivity in his game. There was no pause in his game. Very determined. And, because he's not a super physical guy, I think people don't realize how big a guy he is. And he's going to get bigger, thicker, but he's a tall man. He's big on the ice, and that wingspan is very helpful to him, and he knows how to use it. And so I was very optimistic about him coming out of camp and then going into the preseason. And preseason only made me more optimistic that this team, while it has a great lack of experience down the middle, they have a great advantage as far as youthful skill. And the other thing too, with the 3 centers they can play at pace. They drive the line. Like no one on their line is waiting for them to get up the ice. And that is in today's game, that is such a huge thing, to be able to drive pace in games. The best teams are all teams that are the quickest teams. Look at the Stanley Cup champions. Colorado, the biggest part of their game is there is speed throughout the lineup. And that's what Ottawa and so many other teams want to do. But a lot of times, teams, if they have a veteran center, it's that center that actually can slow down the pace of that line. That's just a reality. On this team, that is not the case. With Norris, with Stützle, and with Pinto, they can drive pace, and that's a huge advantage.
So we talked about the 4th line center, the 3rd line center. Let's get to the top 2 centers. And I'm interested to get your opinion on this, Dean, because pretty much the status quo has been that Brady Tkachuk, Josh Norris, Drake Batherson will be a top line, and then DeBrincat, Stützle, and Giroux will be the second. But we did get to see a little taste of those 2 centers flipped, where Tim Stützle was playing with Drake and Brady, and Josh down with DeBrincat and Giroux. Now, are you of the mind of, and DJ Smith has mentioned this before, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? Do you just keep that top line of the 3 kids together and hope that Stützle can create chemistry with DeBrincat and Giroux? Or do you think it's worth trying to mix things up and spreading that around a little? Because the idea of having Norris and DeBrincat on the same line, 2 elite snipers like that, is pretty enticing too.
Yeah, all good points, but I'll just throw one more thing into the consideration of the circumstance. We go back to what we talked about earlier, and this team wants to be in contention for a playoff spot at the very least at the trade deadline. That can't happen if you don't get a good start, period. So I think the patience level, when you're going through a rebuild and you're developing things, you'll let things ride longer than you would in other situations because you're developing players. You're trying to give them experience. There's no rush to change a certain game, because it won't have ultimately an effect on what the final standings are. So you can let things percolate and develop. I think the patience level is going to go down, and I would not be at all surprised if we see fairly regular switching of those two, Norris and Stützle, back and forth between the lines, to see what the change can do as far as matchups with the other team, to see what can happen with the chemistry on any given night, and what makes them competitive. I think the idea that those guys have switched around enough that nobody is offended that they're not playing with somebody, just how's it going that night? And I think the other side of it too, that you have to take into consideration, at least I think you do, is that one of the great things about a talent like Tim Stützle, he's a star, and I think he's going to start to bump into being a superstar this year. But one of the things that makes him very, very difficult to play against if you're the opposition is his unpredictability. He's all over the place, and he's making you chase, pursue, defend. Like he's just the stop, starts, the moves. The downside of that is he can be very difficult for a winger to play with because he is as hard to foretell where he's going for you as it is for the opposition.
I don't even think Timmy knows sometimes where he's going.
Yeah, I think you're right. He's so quick and so reactionary that you're right. I agree with you. There's sometimes I'm not sure he knows exactly what he knows what he wants to achieve. I just don't think sometimes he has a plan how to do it. He's going to take what they give him and try to spin off guys and create stuff. Well, that's difficult, sometimes for wingers. So if you find on any given night that switching them that night, these two guys have a better chance of reading Tim, then maybe that's the better threesome that night. So I think with what's at stake and time, the ability to let things percolate less now because this team has stated goals that they want to achieve. You can't afford, I think, to let things lie too long if they're not working, even amongst your most skilled guys. So I'm not so certain that we won't see. I'm not going to say a lot of flipping, but I don't think people should be surprised at all at any given time in any game, every game maybe, that you see those two centers flip back and forth now and then, if for nothing else, just to give the other team a different look as far as who they're matching up against. Because let's face it, Norris and Stützle are very, very different players. And if you're trying to, block out in your mind as an opposing coach how you want to defend, who you want your matchups to be, who you want your first pair of defense up against, if DJ Smith starts flipping those two guys, those are very different assignments. And so I think there could end up being a necessity to do it, to try and find a better combination on any given night. And the other thing is, I think there could be an advantage to it in making things difficult for teams to match Ottawa's top two lines.
Good problem to have, though, and one that they haven't had as well in the last few years. And that chemistry has to start off the ice. We know you're in Mont Tremblant right now, Dean, with the team. What's on the agenda? Do you know what their plan is outside of the generic team building? Do you know anything about what they're actually going to be accomplishing there?
No, you know what? It's there's they didn't bring along a sports psychologist. It's not that one of those kinds of things. It's something now that almost every team does. If they have that buffer, that gap between the end of their preseason and the regular season, like Ottawa does, they just go somewhere. Now the team is just the team. Now it's the pick team, and just go somewhere and do stuff together for a day. Nothing major. The team today is playing golf. Then they're going to have a little function. Then they're going to have dinner, and that's it. Then tomorrow, get up and practice, go to the airport, fly to Buffalo, start the season the next day. So not all that mysterious. No, walking on hot coals or, it's not one of those kinds of things. Usually those kinds of things happen in the middle of camp. If there's kind of a break in the middle, they'll go away and do those with a sports psychologist and do, team exercises and mental exercises. This is more, we've wrapped up the preseason. Let's go away. Just the group that's now the team, and get together, have some fun, go play golf together, have dinner, have a practice, and then get on with it. So it's nothing mysterious and nothing super secret. It's a fairly normal thing around the NHL now.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a team that, even with the fresh faces, it just seems like they already have great chemistry. So I'm sure there's not a whole lot of work they need to do in building that, and they can just hang out and have a good time and relax a little before another 82-game season ahead, a big season for them, that's for sure. Now, Dean, final question for me. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll let you get back to the beautiful Mount Tremblant scene there. I think the biggest weakness for this team that everybody is identifying is that decor, right? Like, that's where the problems are still lying. Maybe there needs to be additions, but for you, what's the biggest storyline of this defense core? Is it the young guys and JBD and Lass need to come up? Is it Eric Branson needs to have a big season? Is it Jake Sanderson needs to put this team on his back and lift them the whole way? What's the juiciest storyline for you?
I don't know if it's a juicy storyline. I think it's the ongoing storyline that, if this team wants to meet its immediate goals, this defense core is probably not good enough. And they know that. Pierre Dorion has been very plain about the fact since the offseason that he's looking for a top four defenseman. It's not a huge secret. And I think probably that's what's making it a little bit difficult for him to make a deal to do that, because there's no one in the NHL that doesn't know that. So they're not going to open the door and give him a juicy deal just because he wants it. So I think it might take some time because, everybody knows what Ottawa wants, and it has to be something that's reasonable and something that's going to, hurt them down the road. But I think it's going to happen because Pierre Dorion is an aggressive general manager, as we saw this summer. He's out making aggressive moves. Now that this team is out of the rebuild stage and into the stage where they want to start winning something, first and foremost being a playoff spot, this was always the plan. If you go back to that press conference, 5 years ago, whatever it was, this was what they said they were going to do. They were going to tear it down. They were going to use the draft picks that they got from tearing it down and moving important players. They were going to build this team back up through the draft. And when it got good enough to be competitive, they were going to use the money that was socked away to start adding pieces to make this team competitive in a hurry. And that is exactly what has happened this year. So it's time to do that. So he is out looking for a top four defenseman. And that, I think, is clearly job one. And that is something that I believe is probably going to happen. When? I don't know it. That is more market dependent than Pierre Dorion dependent. He's motivated to do it and everybody knows it, but you have to wait until somebody is in the mood to want to make that move with you. And obviously, the Jake Chychrun conversations have been going on forever since, they told him over a year ago they wanted to trade him. But I think the marketplace has clearly spoken to Arizona saying what you're asking. No one is interested in that kind of payment. So between now and whenever, I think it's going to be one of two things. If, for example, Chychrun is the guy, and I'm not saying he is, but if it's a player like that, you get to the situation where either the seller is tired of waiting for someone to meet their price and they lower it and the deal gets done, or you have, internal pressure that Pierre feels on himself to do a deal because that is the final piece that he feels he needs to really make a serious push for this to be a playoff team. When one of those two things happen, then a deal will be done. And I don't know if it's next week, next month, before December, What I don't think it's going to be something that happens after Christmas. I think if it happens, it's going to happen before Christmas, because I know that they really want, if they're going to do a deal, they want to do it early enough that the new player, meshes in, fills in, gets to know because there's so many cases where players that are, especially important players that are moved at the deadline, they never really assimilate with their team. And they don't really have the impact that you thought they were going to have. And so the longer out you can do one of those deals, especially for an important player, and this would be an important player, the longer out they have to become part of that group, the better it is. And you're not, at the trade deadline, jamming a guy on the roster that no one knows. And, it's so I think it's less likely to happen after Christmas if it hasn't happened by then.
I just had flashbacks of Peter Bondra back in 2004. But Dean, going into season 30 of the Ottawa Senators franchise, and probably about season 20 of me always syncing my radio feed at TSN 1200 with the TV. So make sure I get Dean and Gord's great call. We appreciate you jumping on, Dean, and we look forward to a fantastic season. And I promise you, as long as you're willing, it will not be so long before we get you back on the show. Really appreciate this.
Guys, give me a call anytime.
Stick taps to Dean for joining us. Really appreciate the conversation. If you want more in-depth about his career in general and his relationship with Gord, you got to go back and listen to one of our first interviews, I want to say ever, Pilsy, when we got onto the Locked On stream. It was audio only, but
Yep.
we asked him to come on for 20 minutes. We chatted an hour and 10.
Yeah, he's so generous with his time. And Ross, if you just close your eyes and listen to Dean Brown talk, I can I can hear the sounds of skates. I can smell hot dogs being made. Like that is a part of the senses that bring you the Ottawa Senators. Like we said it, he's the voice of the Ottawa Senators. And when you hear his voice, you know hockey's around the corner. So that's why we decided to put it in today's episode, because we're so close.
Oh, so close. We'll get Gord Wilson back on the show
Absolutely.
as well, coming up sooner rather than later. But Pillsy, we've been teasing it, and now we got to discuss Dillon Heatherington, the 5th captain in franchise history for the Belleville Sens, following the longest tenure, Logan Shaw, at 2 seasons.
Yeah, it's been a lot of bouncing around for Belleville Senators captains, but I like this move, Ross. I mean, this is a guy with 358 games played in the AHL, over 8 years of experience, and he's only 27. So this is someone that really has been very comfortable playing in the American Hockey League. He's played a handful of games, 20 games in the NHL, 9 with the Sens previously. He had 41 games over in Russia in the KHL. So he has a lot of experience. He's bounced around different teams, so he's gotten to have some different flavors and gotten to work with other veterans. I think this is a great choice. Personally, I would have loved to see Scott Sabrin be named the captain. That's a guy Igor told us. The team really respects his leadership, and the guys have a lot of faith and they feel good when he's in the lineup. So I would have liked that as well. But I think Dillon Heatherington is a great choice, and it's going to be interesting to see who the assistant captains are going to be.
Yeah, we tried to pry that information out of the team. No dice. They said sometime before Friday, we'll have the answer to that one. And on Friday, we'll get you that information and a preview of the Belleville Sens season. I like the option as well. I thought, based on the way that DJ Smith spoke about Rook Chartier, I think he could be a dark horse to wear an A this year. Yep. But we'll see as time will tell. But what I know for sure is that Belleville team's got a lot of depth up front and talent.
And on the back end, too.
Yeah, good team. I think they could be challenging, and they need a big year from
They're going to the Calder Cup finals, Ross. I said it. That's my hot take. I don't even think it's that hot. Look out. This team is set.
Well, there you go. You know, we put out so many videos, especially the last couple weeks, because we've had the Locked On Atlantic Division crossovers where we invited on each host of the other divisional opponents on the show. We also had our hot takes last Friday. All of these are available to you on demand. And oh yeah, did I mention Sens head coach DJ Smith joined the show yesterday? And if you were at the cottage, you might have missed it. Pierre Dorion was on the show last month as well. So big things coming for the Locked On Senators podcast, as well as the Sens Central merch store, Pillsy. Yes. We got a lot of action on that after unveiling it yesterday.
Oh my God, that was so awesome to see everyone tweeting out their order confirmed messages. And Ross, people weren't just buying one shirt. We had people getting their whole wardrobe in place here with 2 or 3 different styles. And
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, why wouldn't you? The stuff looks fresh. Our logo is awesome. Shout out our guy, Brandon Miller at Gaydar. He set it all up. He was great to work with. We got lots of long sleeves, t-shirts, hoodies, and there's more to come too. So, and I would say personally, it's all priced at really reasonable prices. So you can get good stuff there. We're fired up. Thank you so much for the support. And we're happy to give you guys good merch because we're going to be rocking some of that merch as well, Ross.
100% we will. Pillsy, has anyone told you the Sens are back?
I've heard it on this show that the Sens are back.
Well, the Sens are back, and for everything you need to know about the Ottawa Senators, you can give us a follow on Twitter at Sens Central. We're on Instagram as well, lockedon.senators. But most importantly, support our great sponsors. Head to Shawarma Palace, grab a platter today, and then make sure that nobody steals it and breaks into your house. So go get SimpliSafe for all your home protection needs. Next time you hear from us, it's going to be an Ottawa Senators game day, and those words have been far too long. Pillsy, how many days since the last Sens game?
Oh, man. You're putting me on the spot here. I'll say 130.
Ooh, close. It was actually April 30th, so I'll give you that as getting the 30. Okay. 165 days since the Ottawa Senators ended their season with Brady Tkachuk scoring his 30th goal in Philadelphia. That game is still hilarious, how much they were trying to tee him up for that one. We're going to tee you up for the season tomorrow. All sorts of predictions and hot takes aplenty right here. But for today, we say goodbye. For Brandon Piller, I'm Ross Levitan, and this has been the Locked On Senators podcast. It's your team every day.